Should I hand this
Sure.
to...
I will leave it on the table and maybe just have a picture happen. Thank you so much. Well, this is better than jury duty. I'm going to mix things up a little bit because I don't have the words to express my gratitude quite yet. So here's just a little bit of music. Thank you. Through the work of Street Symphony, I have learned that justice, like love and community and art, happens between people. It's one-on-one. It is sometimes thankless work that does not happen on Bunker Hill in the Omni Hotel. It does not often happen on the great cultural center stages of the world, like the one across the street that I was lucky to be part of for 12 years. I am so humbled to be able to speak with and on behalf of a community that has taught me that listening is an act of love, and that the greatest gift we can give another person is our attention. And the greatest organizational best practice is to show up. And in Skid Row, we say that phrase just a little bit differently. In walking distance of this room is a street called San Julian Street. And I love telling the story of San Julian because San Julian is the patron saint of people who make shelters in hospitals, of wanderers, and strangely enough, of violinists. The story of San Julian is similar to the story of Oedipus in the sense that Julian was born with a curse, a really terrible prophecy that one day he'd murder his parents. And so as a young boy, horrified by this prophecy, he fled his home. And he lived in the outskirts of a forest with the hermits and outcasts. And one day while hunting, he fired an arrow into a dark shape. And as he walked up to it, he was horrified to find that his arrow had pierced the hearts of both of his parents who had come looking for him. And so Julian was again cast out of society. And the legend says that he was forced to sleep on many a hard bed and bear scornful words from passers-by. But Julian picked himself up and he built a shelter on the side of a highway. And he offered the warmth of his home and hearth to absolutely anyone who needed shelter. And one day, Julian found a man who was drowning in an icy lake. And he rode over and was horrified to find that this man was covered in pustules and boils and festering wounds. This man was a leper. He was someone who society said was beyond redemption, was beyond being saved. And yet Julian dove in to this lake, and he dragged out this man and brought him back to his shelter and fed him every last scrap of food he had. And because the leper was hypothermic and shivering to death, Julian took off his own coat and literally embraced this man. And they fell asleep that way. And of course, in the morning, the leper became the angel that granted Julian his clemency. St. Julian Street is a real place known to many people in this room. It is the epicenter of the crisis of homelessness in America today. On any given night in our community, in walking distance of this room, we know tens of thousands of individuals, mostly poor people of color, who experience chronic homelessness on our streets, in our shelters, in housing that does not acknowledge their fundamental dignity and humanity. And that individuals living in Skid Row face the revolving door of mass incarceration in the largest county jail system on the planet, because our de facto treatment of mental illness in the United States is incarceration. But I do not stand here as someone who has experienced homelessness or incarceration. I am here because this community of Skid Row has my back. The community of Skid Row has taught me not only what it means to be an artist and a human being, but a citizen in this world today. One of the very first times I wanted to take music outside the concert hall across the street and into the community, I went to a place called Patton State Hospital in San Bernardino. And I played this kind of Mount Everest of solo violin works for an audience of about 300 men and women who were incarcerated there. And after I finished playing, a gentleman in the middle of the room, he stood up and he said, "Son, don't you know any songs we know?" And the first thing that came to my mind was the Titanic theme song. And then how there could not possibly be something worse to play in a state hospital than the Titanic theme song. And so I floundered, completely floundered. And in the greatest music lesson and gift of my life, he started to sing to me. And he sang a song called Jesus on the Main Line. Jesus is on the main line, call him up and tell him what you want. If you're down and out and want to get out, tell him what you want. And it took me a couple of years to realize that what this man was asking me for was not to play less unaccompanied Bach, and was not to entertain him, but to see him. Because Jesus on the Main Line was one of the songs sung during the civil rights marches. And this was a black man in his 70s. So he was asking me to see him for his history. He was asking me to see him for his ancestry. He was asking me to see him for his story. And that is the work of Street Symphony in our community today. That I am up here on this stage alone is a kind of travesty, with all due respect, because I stand here because of hundreds and thousands of people who lift up making art as a lifeline in this community. Because making music in Skid Row is not a form of entertainment. It's a lifeline so that the fundamental dignity and respect towards human beings is restored through the act of hearing and telling their stories. And that is the act of disruptive justice that takes place in rooms like this when we hear the stories of organizations like the Inner City Law Center. When you support this organization, you support the fundamental dignity and respect and stories of individuals. And you show up to this community. And I'm so very deeply grateful to have been part of this day. Thank you so very much. So I'm not quite done, of course. because someone mentioned singing. And it's not going to be only you, don't worry. We often talk about our role as artists, as healers and bridge makers, but it's also our role to disrupt and provoke. So I'm going to provoke you, but I'd also like to say that more than anything, we need you. We need you to take care of yourselves. We need you in this world to also understand that disruption is not just a tidal wave that ends structural violence overnight, but that disruption is listening to that still, quiet voice within ourselves. Because of course the story of San Julian is allegory. There is a Skid Row within every single one of us. There is a part of us that we regard as the leper who is beyond redemption and saving. And I believe that we need the arts now more than ever as a public health intervention to tell that story and to lift our voices together as we move forward. So I need your voice as I play this very next piece of music. And thank you again for having me, and thank you for supporting Inner City Law Center. Ready? Beautiful. One more time, let us hear your hallelujah. Last time, make it count. Thank you, man.
Thank you. Beautiful.